On our last railway journey, we travelled down echoing lines. We saw that history clings to every rail, and phantom footsteps still pace forgotten platforms. We followed the iron roads where steam once screamed, where tragedy lingers like soot in the air, and where shadows move through shuttered stations. But the tracks stretch ever onward. And in this second part of our journey, we'll visit Sussex, Lincolnshire, Cambridge, and the Midlands. Seeking shadowy stories, meeting restless spirits, and hearing whispers in the dark that never quite fade. This time, our tales are not only drawn from fading books and yellowing newspapers, but from those who have walked the line themselves, people who've heard things they can't explain. So, welcome aboard the Hidden Realms Ghost Train. Take your seat and take a breath. We're heading back into the mist to seek the ghosts of the tracks. Our journey begins in the flat, open landscape of Lincolnshire, where quiet lanes cross forgotten rails and ghostly echoes linger in the stillness. Welcome to Utterby Halt. One quiet Sunday in the late 1970s, Mr. and Mrs. Hewitt set off by car to explore the back roads between Louth and Grimsby, winding through the Lincolnshire countryside and turning onto Pear Tree Lane, a quiet rural track that crosses the old line at Utterby Halt. They approached the level crossing, and that's when something strange began to happen. As the front wheels of the Hewitts' car touched the tracks, the engine cut out. Mr. Hewitt turned the key and tried again and again without success. Around them, a silence settled. Not the quiet of a country lane, but a thick, pressing stillness. Out of nowhere, a violent gust of wind hit the car, shaking it. And with it came a deafening roar, as though a train were tearing straight through the vehicle. But there was nothing to see. No train, no lights, no movement. Just that roaring noise and the impossible force of wind pinning them in place. Then, just as suddenly, the silence returned. Mr. Hewitt tried the key again, and this time the car started. Shaken, they pulled off the crossing and got out to look around. The railway was deserted. The tracks rusty, half buried in weeds, the gates closed, the crossing long out of use. Across the way stood the old crossing keeper's cottage, which looked inhabited, but no one answered the door. So, what exactly had the Hewitts experienced? An article in The Standard from January 1953 offers a possible answer. Earlier that month, a railway ganger named John Edward Lancaster was walking the line south of Ludborough in heavy fog. He had just finished inspecting the track and was heading back to the station, his hammer over his shoulder. Visibility that morning was down to 12 yards, with the fog mixing with smoke in the cuttings, making it like the blackout. Hearing a freight train approaching from Louth, Lancaster stepped to one side, not realising that a second train, the Cleethorpes London Express, was coming from the opposite direction. Lancaster was struck and killed. Could this be what the Hewitts heard? A ghostly echo of that terrible moment, the wind, the roar, the frozen panic, all replayed across time. The line between Grimsby and Louth was closed by British Rail in 1980, but sections are running again thanks to the Lincolnshire Wolds Railway, who operate steam and diesel heritage trains there. The past, it seems, is never quite finished with us. They hope to extend their line to Utterby Halt, and who knows what might be seen and heard again once trains return to the site of John Lancaster's fatal accident. From Utterby Halt, we travel south into the Midlands, where love and loss are said to haunt a long-abandoned signal box. Our next stop is Brooke End, and a story from the pages of W.B. Herbert's classic book, Railway Ghosts and Phantoms. The story goes that in the 1900s, Brooke End signal box stood watch over a quiet stretch of railway. A plate layer named Mr. Gorman, his wife and their daughter Marion lived nearby. Marion's life changed the day she met Ronald Travis, a young signalman recently posted to the box. The two fell in love. One night, Marion's father caught the couple in the signal box, wrapped in each other's arms. Furious, he forbade them from seeing one another again, breaking his daughter's heart. After another stormy argument, Marion waited until her parents were asleep, slipped from her bed and crossed the meadow toward the railway line, toward the man she loved, unaware that a train was bearing down on her. She nearly made it. But as she stumbled on the upline, the train struck. In an instant, her young life was ended. Her white dress, torn and bloodied, was all that Ronald could find when he reached the scene. The years passed, and then, in the 1940s, something strange began to stir. One spring morning, a freight train halted near Brooke End due to steam issues. As the crew tended the engine, the guard, George Marsh, looked up and froze. A girl in white was walking across the main line directly into the path of an approaching express. He shouted a warning and ran, only to stop dead in his tracks. The girl had no head. Her white gown was streaked with blood. She staggered toward the signal box and vanished at the foot of the steps. The apparition was seen by others in the box that morning, just long enough to send them reeling in horror. Marsh had to be carried inside, pale and shaking, unable to speak. Since then, others have reported the same ghostly figure. Always at dawn, always near the tracks, and always headless. A chilling and tragic story indeed. But is there any truth in it? Mr. Herbert, ever careful with names and locations, left few clues. But I'm reliably informed the true setting is likely Whittaker North, where the line from Birmingham via Water Orton joins the line from Hampton in Arden to Tamworth. And it was here, in the early hours of February the 2nd, 1907, that a young woman named Harriet Webster was killed by a train. Harriet was 32 years old, a former parlourmaid who had been unwell with what her doctor at the time described as nervous debility and brain trouble. She was staying with her aunt and had seemed cheerful when she went to bed that Friday night. But at some point she awoke, dressed herself in a white robe wholly unsuitable for the bitter weather, and climbed out of her bedroom window. Footsteps in the snow showed she had run for over a mile, reaching the railway line near the signal box, where she was struck by the train. Her head was almost completely severed. A newspaper report of the inquest into her death records the verdict as suicide during a period of temporary insanity. Perhaps it is Harriet who still walks the line at dawn. Not a lovelorn ghost searching for her forbidden romance in the long abandoned Brooke End signal box, but something far more heartbreaking. A lost soul, searching for a peace she could not find in life. The line now takes us east to a windswept crossing on the East Coast Main Line, a place where lives were cut short and strange figures still linger by the gate. Our third stop is Conington Crossing. There's something about this crossing that unsettles even the most seasoned railway workers. It's not just the speed of the trains or the loneliness of the place. It's not even that it's known as the Crossing of Death. It's the memory of what happened here. On a fog-shrouded morning in February 1948, a group of German prisoners of war from a nearby camp were being taken to work on local farms. 11 men in total packed into a 3-ton lorry. But as they entered the crossing, dense with freezing mist, a light engine travelling at speed collided with the truck. 6 were killed, 3 instantly. At the inquest, the coroner heard that as many as 723 lorry journeys a week were made over the crossing, which wasn't controlled in any way and didn't even have lights to signal an approaching train. Drivers simply climbed out, opened the gates and checked if the line was clear. Those who made it across safely rarely closed the gates behind them. As the coroner noted, there would be no risk if the gates were controlled. Later that same year, in October, the crossing claimed another life. Colonel Arthur Mellows, a decorated war veteran, solicitor and pillar of the Peterborough community, was returning from a day's shooting with a friend and his faithful Labrador. As they reached the line, his friend stepped out to open the gate, and Colonel Mellows remarked on the London train in the distance. But he didn't see the express coming from the opposite direction. It struck his car, throwing him from the vehicle. He and his dog were both killed. Colonel Mellows was buried with full civic honours. His dog was laid to rest beside the line near the place they died. But some say neither ever truly left. In the decades that followed, strange things were reported at the crossing. Signalmen spoke of hearing the gates clanging open and shut even when they were locked. Some refused to work at the box alone. A few heard the crunch of gravel like the sound of a car approaching, only to find nothing there. Others spotted a vehicle waiting at the gate, but when they went to open it, the car had vanished. According to BBC reports in 1973 and again in 2018, mysterious figures are seen at the site in the early hours. One signalman, tired of the constant supernatural experiences, said he wished everyone killed on this crossing had took their souls with them. Even now, as high-speed trains scream across the line on their way to London or York, drivers sometimes glance sideways just for a moment. And those who know the stories still wonder, who or what still waits by the gates at Conington? Finally, we head deep into Sussex, where the Bluebell Railway winds through tunnels and time, a place where the past has a voice and perhaps a presence. Our last stop? Sharpthorne Tunnel. Just south of East Grinstead lies Sharpthorne Tunnel, a long half-mile passage carved through the hillside. Today, it serves as part of the lovingly preserved heritage line, but back in the 1960s, this place was silent, forgotten and haunting. It was during that time that a friend of the writer, William Barry Herbert, decided to explore the area and the disused station at West Hoathly. By then, the line had earned a reputation. Locals nicknamed it the sulky service after British Rail was compelled to keep it running in the 1950s despite their clear desire to shut it down. By the early 60s, the station platforms were empty, their buildings abandoned and crumbling. Drawn by a mix of curiosity and the eerie quiet, the man made his way into the deep cutting and toward the yawning black mouth of Sharpthorne Tunnel. There were no tracks anymore, just loose ballast crunching underfoot and the long-forgotten brickwork of the vaulted tunnel roof arching above. Then, something strange happened. Ahead of him, he noticed a faint, shadowy figure pass in front of the light at the end of the bore. It didn't walk, it didn't make a sound, it simply moved weightless and swift as though cut from the sunlight itself. Startled but not overly afraid, the man pressed on until suddenly he found himself stopped. Not by brick or steel, but by something unseen. An invisible wall stood before him and he could go no further. Even a stone he tried to toss forward into the tunnel rebounded mid-air, striking this apparent barrier. Turning around, he rushed back to the station, unnerved, unharmed, but with no explanation for what he encountered that day. In 1992, the tunnel began to be used again when the Bluebell Railway rebuilt the line north of Horsted Keynes towards East Grinstead. And over a century after the tunnel's construction, something curious was heard. This account comes from someone with a deep affection for the Bluebell Railway. Between 2007 and 2010, they often travelled the line, including many journeys through the Sharpthorne Tunnel. They knew the ghost stories well, having first come across them in Mr. Herbert's writing. And like many of us, they enjoyed the thrill of such tales, but never expected to experience anything out of the ordinary themselves. Until one night, they did. It was a Saturday evening in 2008, cold, crisp and still. They were standing alone near the old West Hoathly station site. The area was deserted. No one else on the path, no movement on the road above, just the hush of a frosty night. Suddenly they heard a sound, as if someone was striking stone with a hammer. A metallic ringing that lasted only a few seconds, then stopped. There was no echo, no footsteps, no follow-up, just that brief, distinct sound and then silence once more. It could have been a noise from one of the houses above, they thought, perhaps someone doing a bit of late-night work in their garden. But something about that felt wrong, as the sound was too far away and too muffled. The moment stayed with them, unexplained, for years. And then, over a decade later, whilst scrolling through a discussion on an unofficial Bluebell Railway Facebook page, they came across stories about ghosts reported in Sharpthorne Tunnel. One of them was said to be a man named George, who died during the tunnel's construction, buried in a collapse while digging a ventilation shaft. Another was a worker called Henry, said to have died while installing heavy oak doors at the tunnel's southern end, meant to protect lamps from being snuffed out by drafts. And at that moment, the sound they'd heard all those years ago, that sharp ringing, began to make a terrible kind of sense. Research confirmed that during the tunnel's construction in the early 1880s, a man named Henry had indeed died in an accident inside the tunnel. The work he was doing, hammering metal fixings into the tunnel's brick lining to support doors, would have created the kind of sound they remembered. A sound loud enough to carry and old enough to haunt. Was it simply imagination, stirred by memory and suggestion? Maybe. But when history and mystery intersect so precisely, when a sound echoes not just in space but in time, it makes you wonder. Could it have been a ghostly replay of Henry's final moments? As we pull into the end of the line, we leave behind windswept crossings, forgotten halts, and tunnels where time itself seems to falter. But the stories we've gathered along the way are not so easily forgotten. They cling like smoke in the air, lingering in the places where lives were lost and memories took root. The railways were forged with sweat and sacrifice, lines cut through countryside and hill, driven by progress but shadowed by grief. Perhaps that's why the echoes remain. The roar of an invisible train, a headless girl in a blood-stained dress, a shadowy car on a busy track, a hammer striking stone in the dark. Each tale is a reminder that some journeys never truly end. Because while the trains run to schedule and the tracks are mapped in steel, what walks beside them, what waits in the mist, is not so easily explained. So as you step off the ghost train tonight, take one last glance behind you, and remember, maybe not all your fellow travellers are visible. If you've enjoyed this journey through the hidden realms, please like, subscribe and share your own stories in the comments. I'll be waiting at the next station, ready to take you further down the line. Until then, thank you for travelling with me, and good night.